This is the Savvy Parent Podcast, where lawyer and financial planning expert Shannon McNulty and her guests share tips on how to make smart legal and financial decisions for your family. Saving for college can be very stressful for parents. The cost has gone up immensely since we were in school, and it seems impossible to save enough given the continued rise in costs. Thankfully, we have financial planner Nannette Kamian from Cultivating Wealth join Shannon to share her refreshing perspective on saving for college. Nannette shares her thoughts on where education is going and how the costs may change. She gives great advice and concrete tips to help parents not only feel better about the massive task of saving for college, but you'll likely end this episode feeling more clear, calm, and confident about your ability to save for your children's college education. Nannette, we are so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And Shannon, as always, welcome back.
Thanks, Sarah. So glad to be here again.
Yes. So today we're talking about a topic that nearly every parent has thought about, and that is how they will pay for their children's college education. And as a parent of two young boys, I'm excited to have Nannette here because this is something I think about quite a bit, and I don't think I'm as knowledgeable as I need to be. So this is great because as of right now, the cost of tuition is over $40,000 for a private education and $10,000 for in-state and public college. And that's a year. Like, that's not total. That's a year. And that is a huge increase over previous decades. And we know there's so much advice about how much parents need to save, and we all want to give our child the best chance to succeed, but there's so many expenses. And especially right now, as we are still in the pandemic, there's a lot of uncertainty with jobs and finances, and there's not always a lot of money left over. So this causes a lot of stress and heartache for parents. So Shannon, are you seeing this with your clients?
Yes, absolutely. This is always on parents' radars, and I really was so excited to have Nannette on here today because I think she just has a really refreshing and different take on this topic. You hear a lot about and parents just being so overwhelmed with this issue, both sort of financially and emotionally. And sometimes it could be good to kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture and think about this in some new and different ways. So I was just really glad to have Nannette on here to talk about her perspective.
Yes. So Nannette, you're a financial planner and you work with parents a lot, specifically on saving for college. So what are your thoughts on all of this in terms of how the cost of tuition has just grown and grown? And can you offer our listeners any words of comfort around this topic?
Well, luckily, I can offer a little bit of comfort to start out. Actually, the rate of change and the rate of increase has actually gone down in the last couple of years. So it used to be rising maybe 6 to 10% per year. In the last couple of years, what we're seeing is that has slowed down. And my guess is for next year, it's probably going to be a decrease or at least flat because of the pandemic and all the changes that's brought about. So on the plus side, I do think the rate of increase has gone down. So that's a good thing for parents.
Absolutely. Well, that's good to know. And when you think of 6 to 10% a year, yeah, that's shocking, especially for parents of young kids. You do that math and you think, oh my, it seems impossible. So,
right. Yes.
So can you tell us, what do you think is going to happen with higher education and longer term? What do you think is going to happen with the cost?
Well, that's a great question. And what I try to tell people not to do is don't go online and put in information into a calculator if you've got kids that are under 10 years old and try to come up with a number for how much you should be saving, because you will faint or you will have a heart attack and it will be impossible, because basically it says, oh, save another mortgage payment every month for each kid. So I try to tell parents not to do that, because I think over the long term, the rate of change it's not sustainable. And I do think that we're seeing a lot more options come up. Online learning has obviously exploded this year, but I do think there's going to be more options for students. And I also think that the hysteria of sort of what college is your kid attending? What college is your kid attending? Has started to die down a little bit as people start to question, is it really worth spending $250,000 on a college education? Is the payoff there? Is the return on that investment there? So I do think that costs won't be quite so high in the future. I think there's always going to be those expensive universities in the top tier that cost a lot of money to go there. That's not going to change, but I do think, when you sort of go down the rungs of colleges, and the prestige factor drops, I think you will see college become more affordable. I
Yeah,
hope.
I mean, I know I'm hoping too. And yeah, as a parent of two kids under 10, I have done those calculators and I've passed out practically. So that does absolutely help me feel better. So what does this actually mean though when it comes to financially planning for your kids to go to college? Because I imagine we can't just toss this out the window. Can we just save less? What can we do knowing that hopefully there's going to be more options, costs will not continue to increase at the rate they have been? What does that mean for the parents that are listening?
Right. So, what I try to help people think about when they start thinking about this whole problem is I have them take a step back from the money piece of it and really think about what their philosophy is for how they want to fund and what they want to do to help their kids fund their education. I call it, my college funding philosophy. And this starts with parents thinking about what their experience was in college. Did they have to borrow money? Did they have to work while they were in school? Did they get scholarships? Even though the costs are very, very different, these days from when I went to college, you need to think about how you feel about these certain ways of funding college. And then the second step is really talking to your partner about it, because most people who get married later in life and have kids maybe later in life, they don't necessarily know their partner's experience in college. Did their parents pay for everything, or did they work their way through? And so I think it's really important for parents to get on the same page for what they feel like they want to do. Now that may be totally separate from what you can actually do in the future, but what is it that they want to do? Do they want to fund part of it out of savings? Do they want to pay part of it out of their cash flow while their kids are in school, because likely their incomes have increased by then? Do they want their child to take out loans? Are they expecting their child to work during school? I mean, these are all the things I think you need to talk about ahead of time, and I tell people, write it down, laminate it, and put it on your refrigerator. Because by the time your kids get into high school, there's going to be so much hype, and the temperature starts to rise. And I want parents to remember what they said mattered to them, and what their philosophy was. And then finally talk to your kids about it. It's such a big money decision anymore that you can't just tell your kid, oh, don't worry about it, you can go to whatever school you want to, whatever school you can get into. That's just not a smart financial decision any longer, because then the kid gets into their stretch school, and all of a sudden the parents are on the hook for 50 to 70 grand a year. And then all rationale goes out the window. Once they've bought the sweatshirt, it's gone.
Yeah, I laugh because I was living in California when I applied to college and thought I'd go to a state school. And I got into New York University, which is quite different and quite a lot more money. And none of us were prepared for that. But I had a fantastic education there. So I completely, yeah, I think this is really great what you're saying, is because we need to look at our experiences, what our philosophy is, talk to our partners, and also include our kids in the conversation, especially as they get older and closer to college age. So I love that. I'm already feeling better, but there is the actual money and financial piece of it, because I think as
Yes.
parents, a lot of us want to pay for at least some or not have the burden of debt for our kids. So we do want to be saving. So we know all situations are different, and the bigger picture will hopefully be a bit different when we get there. But can you give us some guidance on how much parents should save, or how we approach the idea of saving for our kids' college education?
Yeah, sure. I like it when parents put a dollar amount as far as what a goal is for them to contribute. Is it 10,000 per year per child that they want to help their child with? Is it, 15? Is it 20? I think those numbers are reasonable if you start saving early to try to reach through savings. And so, I always encourage people to have a goal, because if you make a goal paying for, you know, a tuition that you don't know what it's going to be in 10 to 15 years, it's sort of discouraging. So, I think that having a number in mind really helps people.
I love that, because, yeah, it's so hard not knowing what you're going to be trying to pay for. But it also makes that conversation with your kids a lot easier. If you know we plan to have X amount of dollars per year to contribute. And if we don't, here's what may happen. You might need to work, or you have to take out loans, or we can't pay for X because we're going to be paying for more college out of our monthly budget. So I love that. Okay. That's helping me continue to feel better. Okay. So we know we have a goal we're working towards. Where should parents be saving this money? We know about 529s, savings accounts, CDs. I know we have listeners probably in different states and that there may be some variation there. But once parents have these goals and they're putting money away, where should the money actually be going?
Well, I think 529 savings plans are a great idea, especially if you live in a state that gives you a state income tax deduction for contributing. Unfortunately, I live in California and they don't. So, um, that's not helpful for me. But that's probably one of the best options for parents if you do live in one of those states. And some states, like I know Pennsylvania, gives you a state tax deduction even if you invest in a 529 plan that's not Pennsylvania's state plan. So it's really important to learn the rules for your particular state for those 529 plans. A great place to go to figure those rules out is savingforcollege.com. They have information on every state's 529 plan options, and it's a great resource for parents. I would say, those are good because they give you, in addition to the state tax deduction, when you pull the money out, you can get a federal tax. You don't pay federal tax on the earnings in the account if you use it for qualified higher education expenses. So you get a benefit on the way in and you get a benefit on the way out. So that's sort of the gold standard. I would say the kind of account that I like to tell people to avoid is what's called a UTMA or UGMA account, a custodial account that's a uniform gift to minors type of account. And the reason that I don't really prefer those kinds of accounts is because depending on the age of majority in the state that you live in, your child could have access to all of those funds at age 18 or 21. And they can take the money and buy a car or, go on a trip around the world. Or, I've heard stories about drug addiction and, really sad things that can happen if the child gets a hold of that money before they can use it for college. So I think they're not good in that sense. And they're also not good from a financial aid perspective because they are treated as assets of the child in the financial aid formula, which means you're expected to spend more of that money than you would be in a similar 529 account.
Got it. Okay. So that was one of my questions. So if it's in a 529, it does not influence your financial aid then because it's not considered an asset?
Well, no, it is considered an asset. It's considered a parent asset,
Ah, got it.
regardless if it's a parental owned 529 or if it's a custodial 529 owned by the child. It's still considered a parental asset. And those are only weighted up to 5.64% in the financial aid formula. Whereas if you compare that to the child's asset, it's 20%.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big difference. And so if you are in a state where you don't get that sort of tax benefit on the way in, like California, is a 529 still your best bet though, or should you be looking at other options for where to save?
Yeah, I still put money into a 529 for my kids, just because I do like that opportunity to have the money grow because they are younger. I think if your kids are older, then you're not going to have time to realize that benefit of that federal deduction, or you don't have to pay taxes when the money comes out. So, I think just a plain old taxable account, or CDs or any sort of, I would say a safe, kind of investment account, because what I see parents do sometimes is they put money into an investment account when their kids are young, and it's pretty aggressive because they've got a longer time horizon. And what they should be doing as their child gets older is making it less aggressive and more conservative so that you don't want to have something happen right before your kids go to school where, the value of the account drops by 20%.
Right. Absolutely. And you mentioned for, when kids are older, where you might want to be putting your money, but are there any other recommendations you make when someone sees you and their kids are closer to starting their college education? Any other tips when you don't have as long to save?
As far as saving accounts,
Savings accounts or even tips of what to do to save the money in a short period of time?
yeah, I think in when your kids get into high school, that's when you really you really need to look at your budget and you need to look at your expenses and your lifestyle as a family. I worked with a parent a couple of years ago, and they were barely making ends meet. They were going into debt. The husband made a great salary, but they were paying too much for their house. And I just, not only can you not save, you can't pay for college because you're going in the hole every month. So I think this is the time for parents to start sort of dialing it back. Don't buy that new car. Don't upgrade that house. Don't renovate. It's really time to start saving money so that you can use cash flow to help you pay for college. And I normally tell people, as a rule of thumb, think about paying a third from savings, a third from cash flow, and then a third from some type of either borrowing or your student working or, some other way to sort of fill that gap.
Okay. And in that last third of, let's say, borrowing, do you recommend that it's the parents doing the borrowing, doing a second mortgage, or are you recommending that it's the child taking out their own loan with the parents as a cosigner?
Yeah. So I almost never recommend the parents borrow.
Okay.
I think because the child should use their borrowing power through the federal Stafford loan program, the direct Stafford loan program. You get like $5,500 a year for freshman and sophomore year, and then 65 and 75 max in junior and senior year. And you can only, I think this year you can only borrow up to 31,000 total for your undergraduate career. I think that's a reasonable amount for a student to come out of undergrad with. That's not too onerous. You're looking at monthly payments of $325 or so on a 10-year plan. I think that's reasonable if you get a job and you are able to get started in your career. I think kids should have some skin in the game. So I'm not opposed to the kids borrowing. When parents borrow, I think one of the worst things that ever happened was the change in the PLUS loan program, where parents can literally borrow the total cost of the child's education, whatever is not funded by financial aid. And there's no qualification. They're not checking to see that you can pay it back. It's literally, if you have a pulse and you don't have any adverse credit events in the last 10 years or 7 years, you could borrow 75 grand a year to put your kids through Harvard. And nobody's checking that you can pay thousands of dollars a month in loan payments when they graduate.
Yeah, and I love that. If I heard that correctly, so you feel like that roughly 31,000 is an acceptable sort of amount for a student to leave school and be able to pay that off, not feel too stressed. Like you said, they're getting in, they're working. Did I hear that
Yes,
correctly?
yes. I mean, I think that's reasonable
Yeah,
given today's world.
absolutely. But then it also makes me think of those careers that need many, many years of school and kids having lots and lots of debt. So, but I think that's a really good number that also helps us as parents figure out, well, what are our financial goals when we are planning ultimately what we're going to save. So you
Yeah.
mentioned having a budget, especially if your kids are getting closer to college age, but this is important at any time, really. So regardless of how much money a family has, now we're talking if you have some extra money to put places, not, you're barely making your payments right now. When you have extra money, what should parents be funding first? We hear, oh, fund your retirement first and then save for them. Do we do both at the same time? Can you give us any guidance on contributing our own money, not what our employers are contributing to retirement, but when we have extra money, do we save it for our future? Do we save it for our kids? For both? Can you guide us on that?
Sure. So, there's the cliche, you can borrow to go to school, but you can't borrow for retirement. And it's a cliche because it's true. And I sort of take a little bit more forgiving of a path on this question. I personally am saving for retirement and for my kids' education, and that's fine. I think if the parents if they're really young parents, like in your 20s, put all the money in retirement because you have so long for it to grow. You may not have to put nearly as much in later. And then, when your kids are, say, 10, then you can start saving for college when you start earning more money. If you're in your 30s, I would say that's really where you have to, you've got to think about this. And maybe you start spending or saving for your kids' college, maybe a little bit more, and do half and half, maybe retirement and college savings. I would never say fully fund the college savings and forget about retirement. except for one circumstance, and I'll tell you that in a second. If they're parents in their 40s or 50s even, that's where I think it swings back toward, okay, you really got to save for retirement. Unless you are set, you have got to focus on it, because it's the horizon is so much shorter. And I've got, a parent in their 60s right now, and they've got a kid in high school. And I'm like, you guys really have to focus on your retirement. You can't, you can't think about saving for college right now. It's not the right thing to do. What I will say is that when parents are in those 4 years, or if you've got two kids, a couple years apart, 4 to 7 or 8 years of actually paying for college, then, sometimes I say, okay, if you need to dial back the retirement contributions while you're paying out of pocket rather than borrowing, I think that's a smart way to go about it. I think other financial advisors are always like, save for retirement, save for retirement, save for retirement. And I'm, again, it goes back to the parent's philosophy. It's the client's choice. If you want to do this for your children and you're willing to live on less in retirement or retire later, those are your choices. And financial planning is all about the trade-offs.
Yeah. Well, I love that. You've given so much, not just good and clear advice, but I think really helped clarify what to think about and how to approach this, and really just kind of calm me down. So I think you've
Thank you.
probably helped calm down our listeners too, because it's a very stressful subject. So as we kind of close out this episode, what are the takeaways you really want our listeners to remember when it comes to saving for college?
Oh gosh, I think it goes back to that philosophy and really understanding, what are you willing to do and what are you able to do. I think parents need to sort of, I guess, shut out the noise of the world. I wrote a book last year called Crazy College Money, and the first half of it is really talking about how to shut out the noise of the hype and the mania that goes on in high schools these days, and really try to dial in to what you feel and what your partner feels and what your child, really what's best for them. Because it's not best for them for you to go broke sending them to school. So, it's really about becoming very practical and very thoughtful about the decision that you have to make, and realizing that it's a very, very big decision, almost as much as buying a house is.
Absolutely. And Shannon, any takeaways that you want our listeners to bring from this conversation?
Yeah, well, I'll just pipe in New York, there is a deduction for off of state income taxes, which are pretty hefty. So it's always good to take advantage of that. I think it's up to $10,000 a year. So that's always a big benefit for most parents in New York. So it's good to take advantage of that. And I think that a lot of what Nannette was saying really resonated in terms of like really looking at your values. Like this is not just about how much money can you put away in what account. It's what what trade-offs you want to make, what you really value. And I think that a lot of the research has shown that some of these bigger name schools that are really expensive are not necessarily providing better opportunities. That if your child is ambitious and smart, they are going to do well wherever they go. And so I think that's really good to keep in mind as well when we're thinking about this topic of everybody wants to give their child the best, but like Nannette said, it's not the best to kind of make yourself broke paying for your kid's college. And as well, at the end of the day, your kid doesn't want, at the end of the day, if you spend all your money sending your kid to school, they're going to end up taking care of you because you have no money.
Yeah,
Right.
They don't want that. We don't
They
want
don't
that
want
from
that.
them. We don't really want that either. So yeah, this has just been, I think, a really refreshing conversation around a very stressful topic. So Shannon, thank you so much for introducing us to Nannette and having her on today.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you again to Nannette Kamian from Cultivating Wealth for that refreshing perspective that makes the task of saving for college feel much more manageable. If you'd like financial or estate planning information or to join our free community, please visit us at thesavvyparent.us.